Struggling to discuss sex and intimacy with your partner?
Not feeling met, seen, or heard in your relationships?
I'm Janelle.
And I'm Andrea. We're two midlife mavericks sharing our own experiences.
Messy AF and no regrets.
With marriage, divorce, polyamory, and pleasure.
We've learned that when you're brave enough to figure out what you want and ask for it,
with partners, friends, family, and most importantly, yourself,
you'll feel more alive and free.
Question everything, especially your mother's advice.
There's no rom-com formula for this, but don't panic.
Being alone matters. Honey, I can't miss you if you don't leave.
What if your breakup could be your breakthrough?
Our podcast is for Bravehearts.
Anyone who seeks or has found the courage to confront their fears and limiting beliefs about breaking societal norms in the spirit of finding their truth.
If you're seeking permission to be brave in your relationships
and want to feel less alone along the way, we got you.
Hi, Janelle.
Hi, Andrea.
Welcome to Permission to be Human.
I am so excited. Bravehearts, lovely to be back again. We are continuing our 12-part series on, for the next 4 episodes, we're going to be going deep into the tools that Andrea and I have learned. These are communication tools, which have impacted our ability to speak to our partners about sex and intimacy.
So much. So today we will cover nonviolent communication, emotional release tools, active listening, and the now famous RBDSMAT conversation that we've spoken about many times, as well as little conversation hacks that have helped us over the years with our partners. Mm-hmm. So just like as a summary in the beginning, like Janelle, how do you feel like these tools just impacted the way you talk to your partner about sex and intimacy and you as a person?
The number one thing is that these tools helped me figure out how to relax my nervous system. It's learning these tools that unlocked my pleasure and my ability to name my desires, and I can ask for them. So they unlocked my voice as well. Mm-hmm. And it's because I learned these tools that I've walked down the path where I am now as an erotic wellness practitioner and advocate. I mean, there's really like nothing more I can say except that these tools have been instrumental in me now feeling free.
Yeah. And as you say that, I'm just like, this is what allowed me to be brave in relationships. Mm-hmm. Like it actually is probably like the number one thing that has shifted our behavior. So for me, like these tools helped me accept who I am with compassion and forgiveness, which is really hard because at times I was like, no, I'm doing it wrong. No, I'm doing it wrong. They were a constant reminder that I grow because I'm a person who grows, not because I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. And they really led me to this moment where I'm a Braveheart coach and I can help others, give them permission to tap into their body, know what they want, and be in a conscious state when speaking with their partners. It's helped me be a Braveheart guide for those who are listening to their whispers and like want to improve their relationship. So, like a little word of caution, I think when I think of tools, I go immediately into my masculine and I think, okay, like what can I achieve? How can I check boxes? How can I, get these things done and then be done with them? And I'm like, great, learned that, next thing. And that is just not how this shit works, right?
No.
Like, at all.
Yes, I would say that, what you're speaking to there is the comfort for me and for Brave that I want to convey to Bravehearts listening is that, these are just skills. These are tools. These are skills that you can learn. It's okay that you haven't learned them already because we're not taught them. You're not supposed to innately know them. These are skills and tools that you can learn, but they only work, or eventually they work really well when you embody them. And I think that's what Andrea is just speaking to, right now. When you're like, oh, like it's a checkbox. It's like, oh, it's not a checkbox because this is a constant revisiting. Am I like embodying the truth of these tools and skills?
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, instead of thinking them even as tools, like just think of them as like the slides and the swings on the playground of your soul, right? Because I just love that image, right? Because I love being on a swing. And so they really are just as much about learning and understanding who you are and how you show up in the world as they are about your partner. So
100%.
These tools for talking to your partner about sex and intimacy are about you first and then how you can show up. So, okay, Janelle, start with the actual tools. We're diving in. And
okay. So the first one we're going to dive into is active listening. And here is a summary of what active listening is. One, you want to show that you're listening. Number one thing, right? And that comes through things like eye contact, nodding, an open posture. You can interject things like, oh, I see. Go on, right? If verbal cues are helpful. So that's number one, is to show that you're listening. But two is you actually want to avoid interruptions. So you want to let the speaker finish and finish their thoughts without interjecting.
Okay, I just want to, so for me, this is so hard because if someone has this long monologue and I'm like, oh no, I have this, no, like, and part of that should just be like, no, wait. But I just like keep a little notebook and I write things down. Like, it's like, oh, I have to respond to that. Like, oh, I have something to say about that. And then when they're finished, I review it and I'm just like, oh, the ideal me. I don't know how often I actually do this, but like when I go over those things and I'm like, oh, is that relevant? Like, is that necessary? Like, and then I can respond better. For me, writing things down, just like I constantly write things down as people are speaking, like helps me learn, helps me track my thoughts. And so whatever works for you, I encourage it.
Yes. And an example, I have a friend, Sonia, who, like, if we leave each other long voice memos, and what she'll do is while she's listening to a voice memo is in the text box, she'll be taking notes, listening to the voice memo, and then send me back the notes and then be like, oh, here's just my notes, but now I'm going to ask you the questions based on the notes.
This is what I do. This is what I do for your boxes. I'm just like, oh, I have to respond to that. Oh, I have to respond to that. So yeah.
So, okay. All of that to say, those are all ways so you're not interrupting the speaker because you're the listener. Right?
Yeah.
So,
and I just want to say the first thing you said about eye contact and staying like with an open posture, you know, right away, I'm just like, oh, that's hard because sometimes I'm like, oh, like I'm clenched. I'm like kind of folding in. And I just want to say it's like, it might take you a while to actually get.
It could take you years to learn this stuff.
To get to
for
this.
It to be innate.
Hi, I'm open. I'm listening. Like, that's just not what I'm doing right away. Sometimes I'm looking away because it hurts or so.
Or eye contact, it can be confronting. So yeah.
Exactly. So, okay.
So
sorry, go on.
We are, the goal of this podcast is to introduce. We are not expecting anyone to get this dialed in. You just need to know that there's tools out there.
Yeah.
Okay. So continuing on with active listening, you want to show you're listening. You want to avoid interruptions. Number 3 is you want to paraphrase and reflect. So once the person is done speaking, you can then say, I heard you say, it sounds like you're saying, and you reflect back to them and paraphrase what it is. And this helps to convey understanding. And Andrea, you and I used to do this all the time when you would reflect back something to me and I'd be like, oh no, that's not exactly it. And so it wasn't that you misunderstood me. It was that how I conveyed it wasn't exactly accurate. So then it gives the speaker a chance to like fine tune what it is that they're saying.
And so I think this really points to something that my husband not often said, but he has pointed out a couple of times that the responsibility of the communication is on the talker, right? So if someone isn't hearing you, it's not their fault they're not hearing you. It's your fault. Like, and there's no blame, but like it's your responsibility to speak louder or to be clearer. And yeah, what do you think about that?
I do think there are some people who are really bad listeners.
No, for sure. But assuming that someone is like intently listening.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So if we have both people who are like invested in one
Sure.
in conveying an idea, and the other person is actively listening and is still misunderstanding what is being said, yes, I agree with that.
Okay, cool.
The next thing, the next step is to validate emotions, which is, does it mean you are agreeing with someone on what happened or anything like that? But you can say, oh, I understand that was really challenging for you, or that must have been really hard, right? Like it's not putting into an agreement or anything like that. You're just empathizing with them on the experience that the speaker is sharing.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then the next thing is to ask clarifying questions, right? You've restated now already, like paraphrase what they've said, but now you get to bring your curiosity to it. And so ask open-ended questions about what it is that they've shared, right? Like, what happened next? Can you tell me more about that? I mean, can you tell me more about that is like the catchphrase of active listening.
Totally. It's like so cliche, isn't it? And I think there was something early on, this was like years ago, I must have attended some seminar or something, where someone said that one of the best things to say is there more? Anything else? Like, because, there might be something that's not quite wanting to come out, and like really in a non-pressure way, just saying like anything else you want to share.
And then another tool that we use is that with the speaker can say, I'm complete. And that's a sign saying that they're done. And then the listener can at that point, continue with more questions. The other tool of active listening is to withhold judgment, right? Like avoid forming conclusions or judgments or offering advice until the speaker has fully expressed themselves. Because one, even in that statement, what I just said right there, the speaker may not actually even want advice. They just might want to have been witnessed in what they had to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard to not judge or to like not have, like, form an opinion immediately.
Right? Or try to fix it and give advice.
Yes, totally fix it. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And then the last one is to provide thoughtful feedback. So I'm just going to recap these real quick, right? So active listening skills involve 1, showing you're listening. 2, avoid interruptions. 3, paraphrase and reflect. 4, validate emotions. 5, ask clarifying questions. 6, withhold judgment. And 7, provide thoughtful feedback.
Beautiful. I think these are so helpful. Yeah, I should put them up in my house.
I just want to like mention again that these are skills that will not just improve your conversations with your partner when you're talking about sex and intimacy. These are just life skills about how to improve talking and relating to anybody. And in that way, I really feel that like what these next several episodes are about they're really life communication skills. They're not just about being in partnership.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about talking to my daughter. Like these are all really important things.
I'm curious, Andrea, another one that we've talked about, we're going to talk about is NVC, nonviolent communication.
Yeah, so I heard about NVC very long time ago, but really didn't start practicing it probably till a few years ago, like more seriously. So the 4 components of NVC, nonviolent communication, are observations, describing what you see without evaluation and judgment. I'm just like thinking about this again. I'm like, how do I do that without having a particular tone in my voice of how I feel about it or my opinion? It's a challenge, but try to describe what you're seeing. Just like, what's an example of that? Like, actually, I have a question about that because it feels like I would say that I'm saying something about my partner and saying, oh, you seem upset. But that's putting feelings on them, which doesn't seem right at all.
Correct.
So what's an example of an observation?
Um, I see that your tone of voice is increasing. I see
Uh-huh.
that like is there a physical thing? It's not a feeling. I can see
Noticing.
that your face is getting like pinched, right? So like, is there a physical attribute that's kind of like a fact, not I'm guessing on how you're feeling inside.
Right. Something that's not, it's not it's not debatable,
Right.
I think is I remember using that as, okay, it's not debatable. So second component of NVC is expressing how that observation makes you feel. So to me, that was like the clear, like, that's the I statement. It's not the you seem upset. It's like, I'm feeling charged. I'm feeling sad. And
Right.
that was,
And to go back to what you just said, like if it was like, oh, the first observation was, oh, I'm noticing that you're starting to speak louder, and that your tone of voice is becoming sharper. I feel myself now starting to shut down and get tense when
Mhm.
I hear that tone of voice.
Okay. The third component of NVC is identifying the unmet need behind the feeling. So this is, to me, it's kind of a guess. Like, like I'm feeling this way. I feel like this means that I need X. And I think in a conversation that could be, I need you to hold my hand, or I need us to slow down. And so, I mean, that's how I've used it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the request. Ooh, the request. So making a clear, actionable, and positive request. Note this is not a demand, right? So this is not like I'm saying this and I want you to, and I need you to do it right now and I expect you to do it right now. This is like I'm requesting this and this person may or may not comply with that request.
Mm-hmm. Like an example of a request could be, oh, like I hear that this is really important to you and I want to give you my full attention. It's 11 o'clock at night right now and I'm exhausted. My request is we have this conversation again tomorrow at
Mm-hmm.
9 a.m. when we both have some spaciousness and I'm feeling more recharged.
Yeah. And a request I often used was, can we go into a different room and be touching? Can we, yeah, can we table this conversation? Can, like, or even just, I need a moment alone. I'll be right back. I need to go
Mm-hmm.
collect myself. I need a drink of water. Like, I need to breathe, or can we take a moment to breathe? Um, and I feel like that's something I've learned over time to like tap into my body and see what it needs, but sometimes have a hard time voicing that request. And I mean, my experience with NVC, the big, like the primary component of it was to stop saying, you're doing this to me. You seem this. Like starting all the conversations with you and just being like, no, back to me. No, I feel
Right.
this way. It's nothing to
Right.
do.
Or like,
It's
or
not
that you
blaming
feel
you.
angry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this was big because I was basically blaming my emotions on my partner. Like, you make me feel this way. It's your fault that I'm XYZ. And this was just like owning my own emotions, taking responsibility for my own feelings was a critical point in helping me talk to my partner about anything, and especially sex and intimacy.
Yes.
So,
There is a book that we recommend. That's just called Nonviolent Communication that I highly recommend. And Bravehearts, I have a funny story, which is that this was one of the earliest tools
okay,
that
go ahead.
we learned. I'm trying to think. Like this was like before we were married. Like we were still dating. This is like 6, 7 years ago, maybe my first time. And I took notes, and I found my notebook yesterday, which is right here. And I had titled it
Intimacy.
Intimacy and Sex. Never forget. It was like I was using these tools, then I would get intimacy and sex is how I viewed it. And I can say now, wow, I have come a long, long, long way. And One of the things that was really, really hard in the beginning when I was doing this was because I felt like, oh, I have to change who I am in order. Like, I didn't understand that communications was actually a skill. I thought it was a personality trait, and I thought it was a way of being. Because I was someone who was outgoing and talkative. I thought that meant I was a good communicator. I had no idea that there were skills to be learned.
Right. I don't want to say that it's not communication skill, communication styles are a personality trait, I believe. And there are different ones. They're not right or wrong, but it is a part of to me, it is a part of your personality, how you communicate.
But there are skills within that, right? Like you and I are out loud processors, right? I didn't, that hasn't changed, right? But my ability to be a better listener has changed. My ability to be more thoughtful, my ability to take responsibility for my own emotions, all of these things that we've just reviewed in the last 20 minutes.
Right.
Are not styles, they're skills. There's like an entire industry on this subject of I'm an out loud processor and how can I be a better listener? How can I ask more thoughtful questions? How can I take responsibility for my emotions that are coming up while I'm having a conversation?
I see.
Like, this was just like a whole like area of like it's such a fundamental part of being human is learning how to communicate. And I was only learning this as a skill set in my mid-40s.
I don't know why, but cultural conditioning or somehow I really got the idea, particularly in a partnership, that it was just about the other person, right? Like as we've talked about, we leave each other these long voicemails, and I would go on about my partner. My partner feels this way. My partner's doing this. My partner's doing that. And then Janelle would reflect back to me, no, what about you? No, back to you. No, back to you. Not him, you. And then I would do that for her. And I'm not sure why that was our default, but it was. And so this is an unlearning as much as it is a learning.
Oh my gosh, mic drop. Yes. Yes. And I think that for women, we're just conditioned to put the other person first and not put ourselves first in terms of how we're feeling, to like put it all onto someone else. And so I love what you just said, that it is an unlearning, that we are responsible for ourselves in this way.
Totally. Okay, should we move on to emotional release tools?
Yes.
Which so big for me. I went to ISTA, which we have talked about many times on this podcast. It stands for International School of Temple Arts. It was a life-changing experience for me. And ultimately, I learned, A, as I just mentioned, I am responsible for my own emotions. B, just because I am big and intense and reacting and have a lot of emotions doesn't make me wrong or a bad person. It just means that I have energy that needs to move through. And so this was just an important fundamental belief for me, because I really thought, I get so big and I have all this shit coming up and my partner doesn't, and it's just a problem. I just have to stuff it down. Like it's not good. And then I would just leave every conversation feeling bad. And emotional release tools are essentially shaking, pillow screaming, hand screaming. It's a way to expel this energy out that then brings you to a calmer place where you can have a more conscious conversation. And it's a release of energy. And it's just that single thing alone has really changed my life and my conversations. Not that I don't always do something about it now. Like I notice it, right? I'm like, oh, I have this charge coming up. And so then I can say, oh, I have a charge coming up. This is not about you. This is not your fault, but I have a lot of energy I need to release. So that was really big for me.
Yeah. Beautiful. And Bravehearts, we think these tools are so important that we have covered them a couple of different times. One, there is an episode already about emotional release tools. And then two, in one of our upcoming episodes, we're going to be interviewing Brianna Cribera, who it was my ISTA facilitator at my first ISTA, that taught me emotional release tools. So we're going to be actually getting the perspective from the experts about these tools.
Janelle, do you want to talk about RBDSMA?
Mm-hmm. I do. And again, this is another one of those tools that we both learned at ISTA that we have other podcasts about, and we're also going to be talking to Brianna about these tools as well. But the acronym, R is for relationships, B is for boundaries, D is for desires, S is for sexual health, M is for meaning, A is for aftercare, and then there's a T at the end for trauma. And this conversation has been, in terms of what relaxes my nervous system the most, it is for me to have this conversation, certainly with a new partner, but also even with a current partner, where we're just wanting to come back together again and be like, oh, here's where I'm at in this moment. Andrea, like, you didn't love this though. When I first learned this, I was like, oh my gosh, Andrea, this thing, blah, 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 blah. And you were like,
No, I really didn't love it. It felt too clinical. I just kept picturing like me laying down in bed with a partner and being like, okay, let's talk about this first. And that's just like killing the mood and being too linear. And it took me a while to embrace it. And when I say a while, I mean like years. Like, but that's the point, is that you can have this conversation with your partner, like your longtime partner, your husband of 20 years, or you can have it with a completely new partner or someone you've been seeing for a year. And once I started doing it, it definitely led to a more vulnerable and honest conversation about intimacy. Like it was like getting vulnerable before you got naked, like sometimes weeks before, not hours before. And so I kind of think of it as like really staring into your lover's eyes, your potential lover's eyes, before you're actually staring into their eyes in bed. Like it's very different. And we've both had some really interesting responses when we've chatted with people about this. Let's see, Janelle, what was one of yours?
One for me was, he said at the end of this conversation, we took like 2.5 hours. The whole evening was based around the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a second date. And he was like, I feel like we just had 30 dates rolled into one.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of mine. One we just did over dinner, right? It was like a 2-hour dinner. And we just like took our time, right? It was just like, oh, and then, the R led to other things, and then we'd get back to the acronym. But like it helped us just like navigate each other's mazes so much easier. I did have a very new partner say, wow, like I feel so respected by you. Like I feel so seen by you. And it was beautiful.
Yeah. So. And it also gives an opportunity of choice, because these are vulnerable conversations. One of your answers, the other person may not relate to and resonate with and want to continue. Like a really obvious one is if you're someone who is looking for a lifetime partner and wants to have kids, and the person who's sitting across from you actually is not looking to have kids, then that might be enough to say, great, like you're wonderful. And I think this isn't going to be in alignment, and kind of is a waste of our time if we pursue it. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong with either one of the opinions. It's just it's an acknowledging of different desires.
And I mean, ultimately that sounds awesome. And what comes up for me as you say that is, I think like the 27-year-old me would have been like, oh, it's having the courage to be that honest with yourself and with this new partner. Because the other part is work. You're like, but like really close. So like, let's just keep going. I mean, that's what I would have done at 27. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to stop.
Well, I think that's actually like what you're naming is the paradoxical wisdom of this conversation is it's in a way, it's actually less about the other person's answers, because it's about what your answers are, because you have to reflect on them. What are my desires? What are my boundaries? And right there, these are not words that I had when I was 27, right? And so then if I have to state those out loud, then can I enforce my own boundaries that I just said, right? And so
Yeah.
This is where like this is such a excavation of our own ways of being and desires.
Yeah, it seems like I have this like memory of you telling me a story about, but I remember you said you asked someone, "What are your desires? Like, what do you really want me to do?" And I think you described them as like rolling over off the bed and like going into fetal position and like hiding their eyes.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, and so we were actually doing the 3-minute game from the Wheel of Consent. So it's a little side note, but I said, yeah, the 3-minute game. You're going back and forth and asking, like, what would you like to do to me for your
Mm-hmm.
pleasure, or
Mm-hmm.
what would you like me to do to you for your pleasure?
Right.
And in what would you like to do to me for your pleasure, this person completely went into a collapse. Like
Yeah.
the idea of having a desire and asking for it was so overwhelming for his system.
Yeah. And this is normal. Like this totally
Mhm.
happens. Like it like you shut down. Maybe you don't like physically show it, but when talking to your partner about sex and intimacy, you're going to come up on a question and you're like, I don't want to say that out loud. I'm not sure. Even with
Mhm.
someone you've been sleeping with for 10 years. So this is what happens.
And what I'm really excited about is to be interviewing Carmen de Jesus in an upcoming episode on the Wheel of Consent. She is a facilitator and um, works at the School of Consent. And so we're going to go dive deep with her expertise on that subject.
So finally, we have some just like little conversation tools and hacks that we've basically both come up with over the years in talking to our partner about anything um, from Google Calendar to sex and intimacy. And so let's just share a few of those. Um, one of mine that I have used but not often enough is talking back to back. And I know this, in a sense, violates this active listening that you were talking about like meeting, having eye contact. But because I tend to show my emotions a lot on my face and I'm a reactor and I'm always looking at other people's faces to see what's happening on their face, potentially interpreting things that are not true. And I was also with a partner who tend to be more of a peacekeeper and so I think sometimes feared upsetting me. It has helped us not to be looking at each other when we're talking about things. And so it can be talking back to back. It could be talking on the phone, wherever you cannot see each other's face and you feel like you can express a little bit more freely that way.
Mhm.
What about you?
One of my communication hacks that I figured out really early on was touching while talking.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone who's done like the 5 love languages, physical touch is actually my top one. And I had this really interesting discovery where I realized that if I was having a hard conversation with my partner and we were not touching, and by touching I mean holding hands or even like just like my arm touching his arm in some form. Could have even been like
Yeah.
our feet touching below the table. If we were not touching, it was as if my ears no longer worked. Like
What do you mean?
I could not hear what he was saying. Like my body was in this like reaction of and like going into story of, oh my gosh, are we gonna break up? Oh my gosh, she doesn't like me. Oh my gosh. And like I had all these overwhelming like it became very ungrounded. And stories just floated
Yeah.
in my head. And so I was ended up having like dialogues with myself instead of active listening to what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And what I figured out was if we then had the same conversation, but we held hands, something about that was so grounding for my nervous system
Yeah.
that my ears opened again. And whatever like alarm systems were going off about and like making everything so much bigger than it really was, I got to be like, okay, I can hear you now. And so that's something that was a tool that I still use today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think even what we did, just like sitting, legs crossed, face to face, knees touching, like just that was helpful, even if we were. And because sometimes I feel like he would reach out to touch and I'd be like, nope, not right now. Like I resist it if there's any like activation or charge going on for me. And so typically it had to be a little bit less in the beginning. And then maybe I would like, as the conversation went on, we could touch more. But yeah, that was a challenge. The other thing
I mean, that's a good point. What you're saying is that was important for me, but if my partner was someone who actually got activated by touch, or it wasn't calming to their nervous system, then you have to find something else.
Yeah, totally. That's what, I definitely have to do with someone in my life whose love language is not touch. And that can feel like a rejection at first. It doesn't feel good. And like trying to honor what they need and how they can be most comfortable and how their nervous system is best. The other thing that is, I would say, is, to me, it's counterintuitive, but sometimes communicating via text, via email, via a note on the mirror, via a letter really was helpful for me. And I actually was unsuccessful at shifting some of our conversations to email. I wanted that to happen, but it just didn't like work with our life that easily. But I feel like this did several things for me. It would allow me to process the news he was giving me on my own terms, on my own time. I could read it. I could walk away. I could reread it. I could sleep on it. And then I could come back to him when I was ready to talk about it. Like, if we could have done that from the beginning, like, it would have been so much better, I think, in a lot of ways. The other thing is that it could have been more efficient at times, because usually we were like running around like, oh, we have like 15 minutes to connect between these two events that are happening in our life. And, oh, my daughter's gone for an hour and this is all the time we have. And so it felt rushed. It didn't feel like we had a lot of time, like we were just trying to squeeze so much into a small container. And then I definitely had a trigger around like, oh, we have to go now. Right. Because we had to. And I would just get so triggered around that. It's like, no, I'm not finished. Like, I need more time. Like, we have to talk about this more. And so I think that sending off those emails and then scheduling a time to come together and discuss just gave it more structure for me when I could do that. It also, strangely enough, because this relates to one of the questions we had at one of the Braveheart conversations, where someone was asking about how to weave intimacy into their everyday life instead of just in the bedroom. And I think this can end up actually weaving intimacy into householding, right? Rather than like saving this conversation for like when you're in bed, like maybe you set aside a different time or a different container or a different setting to do it. Or maybe you're doing it on email, or like, and then adding a heart and adding an I love you, or adding something that like connects you at an intimate level, definitely outside the bedroom. That can be incredibly helpful.
Another tool that I eventually like really like embraced was actually setting a container. You kind of spoke to it, but really naming like thinking about when am I the most resourced to have a conversation, and then how long do I have? Right? As Andrea knows, I am renowned for underestimating time. And I think something is going to take 2 minutes, and it doesn't. And so getting better at being like, okay, I'd like to block a half an hour, or I'd like to block an hour. And then acknowledging that, oh, okay, we've got 5 minutes left. We haven't finished this conversation. Can we schedule another one to follow up? But kind of putting an end to it versus what I would do in the beginning is that we could process for hours and hours and hours, and then it never like it. You're just kind of like swimming in the quicksand of it all.
So I want to talk about habits, because we have talked about active listening, nonviolent communication, emotional release tools, the wheel of consent, our own conversation hacks, and all of these really ultimately, ideally, would become habits of yours, right? That you're weaving into every conversation. And for some reason, when I was often talking with my partner, and we were often under a time limit, or, just it seemed like we were always out of time to fully discuss things, I just wouldn't take the time, right? I wouldn't take the time to touch. I wouldn't take the time to write things down. I wouldn't say, okay, you know what? We both should sit on the couch. Okay, let's let's put the timer on and say, okay, we have 30 minutes to do this. Like, I just didn't take the time to do those things. I didn't take the time to get water or go to the bathroom. Or like, it's just self-care, really. And so however you can build those habits into your life, do it. They need to be attractive. They need to be easy. They need to be simple. Like, have the candles ready by the bed, or know how much time you have in a particular container. Plan ahead, schedule it, put it on the calendar. And we often just would kind of flow unscheduled into these conversations. And I'm just like, this is not the good time to be having this conversation. And yet it felt like, but when else are we going to do it? And so we would just dive in anyway. And that just didn't set us up for success. And so I really encourage you to think about how you can weave these into your life for you and your partner, right? See what they have to say about that. Like, how will it help them? Is it a cheat sheet? Is it a notebook sitting with them? Is it always going downstairs instead of staying upstairs? Is it shutting the doors? Like, what are those things that will help you develop the habit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. And so Bravehearts, which tool are you going to explore this week, or research, or try, or whatever it is? Know that these tools can impact all the conversations that you're having, but especially those that you want to be having regarding sex and intimacy with your partner. And we wish you a lot of luck. As I pointed out, like, change does happen when we want it to happen. So I'm really grateful for all the efforts that I put into myself. And I would say and Andrea can pat my back on this. I have become a much better listener and communicator over the time.
Absolutely.
These last many years.
Absolutely. Yay. We love you, Bravehearts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Good luck.
Hey, Bravehearts. Looking for permission? Work with us. We offer Braveheart coaching.
Follow us on Instagram.
Meet us in real life at a Braveheart conversation.
Subscribe to our newsletter.
Do all this and more at our website, permissiontobehuman.live.